Hello, everyone, and welcome to 13 Now, our online service where we bring you all sorts of programming. Tonight, we are delving into the campaign of 2024. We're going to feature over the next couple of weeks 4 different races that will be decided on the August 20th primary date. The first one we're going to feature tonight is the race for the 14th Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office. The incumbent of that race is Glenn Hess. His challenger, Eric Garman, and both of these gentlemen are with us tonight right here. I'm sorry, my God, I said Glenn Heston. Larry Bassford, I'm so sorry. Larry, I had a flashback there for a few years ago. Larry Bassford, the incumbent, is here, along with Eric Garman, who was the challenger for this race. Okay, so we've gotten our first mistake out of the way. That's going to be the only one. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Y'all have met several times already in different debates around the community. This one's going to be a little different. It's going to be more of a free-flowing conversation. We're not going to time questions and that sort of thing. We're going to have a discussion. But what we're going to start with is a 1-minute opening statement from each of you, and we'll go alphabetically last. Dave, Mr. Bassford, you can start with your 1-minute opening.
Good evening. It's been an honor to serve as your state attorney for the last 3.5 years. My mission has been clear: to uphold the public trust, to keep our families and communities safe, and to enforce the law. I've spent 30 years training and preparing for this job as a prosecutor, and that experience allows me to lead by example. And we've been successful. Our crime rates are down, and Governor Ron DeSantis has recognized our office as being number 1 in the state when it comes to sending dangerous criminals to prison and enforcing the law. But I'm also proud of our diversion and problem-solving courts. These are for people who commit nonviolent crimes. It allows them to pay their debt to society, but to get their lives back in order and be productive members of our community. Experience matters. I'm the experienced prosecutor with a proven record of keeping our families and communities safe, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bassford. Mr. Garman, go ahead with your opening statement.
Thanks for having me, Tom. What I would like to say first and foremost is to everybody out there, I know it's been a very hard week, both nationally and locally. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Petronas family. With that being said, my name is Eric Garman. I'm running to be your state attorney. I do also have some experience. It's different than Larry's, and I think it's important. And I'm glad that we have tonight to go into that a little bit more. Where I don't have prosecutorial experience, I do have experience as an investigator or training officer and many other roles in the police departments, building cases from the ground up, from the bottom up, as my opponent would say. And then I went from there and I joined before that I joined the United States Marine Corps right out of high school. And in this position, leadership very much does matter. But leadership is more than just being elected to a position, placed in a position, or otherwise. And leadership is one thing that the Marine Corps does teach you well as the police force. I would like to take the skills that I have to bring the 14th Judicial Circuit to a more even playing field for everyone. And I humbly ask for your vote on or before August 20th, and hopefully we'll get in tonight some reasons why that would be the case.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to start just by saying, Mr. Bassford, do not tell me why he should not be the state attorney. Tell me why you should be.
Well, as I indicated before, Tom, I've been training for this position for over 30 years. I've got over 260 trials that I've tried, as well as 60 cases that involved homicides. This allows me, as I talked about just a few moments earlier, to lead by example, to mentor and train the younger attorneys that we have there at the state attorney's office, as well as the seasoned attorneys that we have there. I've tried every type of case that you can imagine, from misdemeanors all the way up to first-degree murder cases where I have sought and obtained the death penalty. I've also supervised 30 attorneys, another 70 people as support staff positions, managed a budget of over $11 million, and also created programs that I think makes us more accountable to the public. For instance, our Critical Incident Review Team, that's a program that I created. It involves our seasoned prosecutors and investigators with over 250 years of experience. We look at all cases involving the officer's deadly use of force and other homicide cases. In addition to that, we have expanded our diversion programs while I've been there. We created a construction fraud task force. And if you're going to lead people, okay, you've got to know where you're going and how to get there. As a prosecutor, I can still lead and mentor the prosecutors, not only with the new prosecutors, but the ones that have 7 years of experience, 15 years of experience, 30 years of experience. We are a team there at the state attorney's office, and they need a leader. The state attorney is more than just a manager. You have to understand the dynamics involved in working with law enforcement. We have a great partnership with all of the sheriffs and the law enforcement agencies that work in the 14th Circuit. And the statistic that I was talking about earlier, being number one when it comes to sending dangerous criminals to prison and enforcing the law, that is because of our great working relationship with law enforcement and the team atmosphere, teamwork that we have with them and in our office. When we go to court, we go as a team, and I'm the leader of that team.
Okay, Mr. Bassford. Mr. Garman, same question to you. Why should you be the state attorney?
Well, Tom, again, leadership is very important, and leadership is, in fact, more than just being a manager. Leadership is sometimes being willing to be the one not invited to dinner. It is the person who sometimes, as any good friend or any good manager or leader, the person who will tell you what you do not want to hear or what you're not really ready to hear. A good example of that is we should have a very close relationship with law enforcement. I can tell you, being in law enforcement in one way or another since 2005, I've seen a lot of different administrations come and go. I've seen a lot of similarities, and I've seen a lot of things repeating patterns. And one of those is still cops contact me. I had some contact me earlier today. I don't even know who to call. So it's more than just being a good friend or a good acquaintance or a good partner with the police chief. It's being a good partner for every single officer down the line. A good example of that is one of the main things that we have to do is not just simply go in and prosecute cases. And what I would tell you is, I agree with Larry. We have a fantastic team of people at the state attorney's office. But with that being said, there are some simple things that really it falls on the leader of the agency, and that is first and foremost Brady letters, right? And for those who don't know, if there's possibly exculpatory or evidence that might sway the jury or the fact finder away from prosecution or otherwise, we have to let them know that. A good example is a Panama City Beach Police Department officer last September was fired. He was fired for lying multiple times. It was not a secret. It was very well known. But because there's not a direct line, a direct liaison line, the Brady letter for that we have an officer who is a multiple time punished and fired for lying and dishonesty, we're still prosecuting his cases. And we were until about a week ago. So the letter warning everybody that we have an errant officer went out almost a year later. We owe it to the officers out there doing it correctly. We owe it to the citizens, and we owe it to everyone else in the 14th Judicial Circuit to proactively say, hey, Chief, what's going on? Is there anything I need to know about? Because at the end of the day, that's part of preparing for trial, and that's part of preparing for trial properly. It also means conflicting when you should conflict, whether it's a small conflict or not. Even the appearance of bias can be a very harmful thing, not only in one case, but ongoing. A great example of this is if your son and daughter-in-law are primary case agents in making thousands, hundreds of cases a year, you probably, the prosecutor working that case probably is not going to feel that they have the complete, free, unfettered position to do what they need to do. And to my knowledge, there's never been a conflict on any case between Mr. Bassford and his son and his daughter-in-law. So it's being willing to sit and do what may not be popular, but what is in fact right.
Okay, yeah, you kind of got a little off tangent because I wanted you to tell me why you should be state attorney as opposed to sort of hammering some of the issues that Mr. Bassford has. But since we've gone that direction, I'm going to give Mr. Bassford a chance to respond to some of the things you've just said. So, Mr. Bassford, go right ahead. Thank
you, Tom. For instance, this issue that Mr. Garman has talked about on the Brady letter. That was a breakdown in communication with that agency and us. We have a policy in effect that whenever there is a disparaging information, Brady information about an officer, whether that's being fired or reprimanded or suspended, they are supposed to notify us. As soon as this came to our attention, I got on the phone and talked with the chief of police out there at the Panama City Police Department, and he acknowledged that this was just a breakdown in communication and they had not notified us.
Was it the beach or was it Panama City?
I think the one that he's talking about is the beach.
Is the beach. Okay, you
Yes,
just
sir.
said Panama City. I want to
Yes,
make sure
it is the
that.
beach.
Yeah.
Excuse
Okay.
me. In regard to the number of cases that we prosecute, we do conflict out on cases where we believe that it would be appropriate to do so. Each year we prosecute about 18,000 cases. Okay, I'm not involved in the prosecution of all 18,000 cases. That would be impossible for me to do. Our prosecutors are. Our vision is to make sure that we seek justice in every case, and that's what we do. We make our decisions based on the facts, on the law, and on our desire to keep our community safe.
It's kind of easy. I won't say easy, but it's easy for you, Mr. Garman, to attack his record because he has the record, and at this point, you don't have one. 4 years from now, if you were to have the office, you're probably going to be faced with the same sort of thing. What is it about what's happening at the state attorney's office, or at least in your mind, what's happening at the state attorney's office, that makes you want to get this job?
Sure, and my answer is going to be very much the same. That's why I should be the state attorney, is that I'm not afraid to do what needs to be done when it's time to do that. Again, I have not only the leadership skills, but, I've been a business owner, and I've been a business owner since 2011, a law firm owner since 2017. And what I can tell you is being a leader and being the head of the agency, or if you would, the managing partner of a very large firm, is all about taking issues that you either don't know or need to know better and putting the people in place that know those. For instance, there's supposed to be a specifically designated domestic violence prosecutor. That's not always going to be the head of the agency, of course not. But no different with major crimes or otherwise. It is about being able to put the people in place and put them there and keep them there, retain that talent, attract that talent, and just make sure, again, that you do the right thing. Because when you do not, the cost of that is very heavy. It's very costly to retry cases. It's very costly to come back on appeal. But more than the financial cost, a lot of times, and Mr. Hess before Mr. Bassford, and Mr. Bassford, I'm sure would agree that the avalanche, I believe it was called by Mr. Hess, of body camera, for instance, is enormous. But we can't ignore it. And many times you'll have exculpatory evidence or evidence that would possibly help a case. And if we're not looking at that till months and months later, it's just doing a disservice to everybody. So it's being willing to do things a little different. Look, things have changed a lot. And though Mr. Bassford's been at that office a lot, the world is changing, as is the way that we hire, fire, and manage people. So we need to be able to change with that workforce. But more importantly, it's just being able to do the right thing no matter what. And what I would tell you is, whether it's 18,000 cases or 2 cases, if I have a conflict of interest, I'm going to conflict off the case. It's just that simple. It's not a deflection. And it's really not an attack. I'm willing to do what's unpopular, even if it's 18,000 times.
You sounded as though you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded to me like you were just saying things have changed, the world's changed, that Mr. Bassford is too old for this job. Is that a little too simplistic, or is that what you're saying?
I would say that is too simplistic. I can tell you, being a business owner, just attracting and retaining talent has drastically changed in the last 10 years. And kind of where a lot of that comment can come from is, again, if we want to get the absolute best, we're going to have to go to them. Used to, people just were like happy to have the job. They would come to you in a sense, but to get the best talent, and that's what we need here. I mean, we've got the world's most beautiful beaches. We've got great salaries. We've got everything, but it's not the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. You have to go to them, and you have to be willing to put that work in, is a great example of what I was talking about.
Mr. Bassler, I'll give you a chance to respond to that, please.
Well, I'm certainly not going to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him in this campaign. That will be for the voters to decide. But for instance, I have yet to hear how he can improve on being number one in the state out of all the 20 state attorneys in sending dangerous people to prison. And that's what part of my job is to make sure dangerous people go to prison and that we follow the law. Or our office has also been recognized as being number one in clearance rates. That means in effectively and efficiently prosecuting cases in a timely manner. I haven't heard any of that. He seems like he wants to try to deflect the issues on other things. Leadership, well, I'm the leader of the team there at the state attorney's office. We know where we're going, and I can mentor the people that are there at the state attorney's office.
Is it fair to say that recruiting is an issue at your office?
Yes, recruiting is an issue throughout the United States. Every state attorney in Florida, as well as every public defender, not just in Florida, but in the entire United States, are facing these problems with people wanting to be public servants and go into this type of work. You know, we've had turnover at the state attorney's office ever since I've been there for the last 30 years, and we will have that forever. Part of that reason is because we are great training grounds for future lawyers and future private litigators. If you look at the circuit judges that we have 13 circuit judges. 7 of those have prosecutorial experience. We get lawyers out of law school. They come here, they work for us 2 to 3 years, and then they go on to making bigger money and working with law firms like Perry & Young or Morgan & Morgan, where they can sometimes work at home. They can make a lot more money than they make at the state attorney's office, and they have less stress than they have at the state attorney's office. So yes, turnover is always going to be a problem. That's why it's important to have somebody with the experience, prosecutorial experience, somebody that can teach a young prosecutor and mentor older prosecutors, because we're going to have turnover, as opposed to someone who has never tried one single case as a prosecutor. How are they supposed to mentor and teach and guide people who have more experience? Well, we have misdemeanor attorneys that have been with us less than a year that has more experience in the courtroom than my opponent.
Mr. Garvin, your response to that?
Sure. Just as Larry is graciously not going to hold my lack of years against me, I won't hold his lack of diversity against him. With that being said, saying that there are people there for less than a year that have more experience than me is just absolutely false. I have trial experience both in the civil world and in the criminal world. But with that being said, again, it is important to have prosecutorial experience, but it's important also to you always want to hire somebody smarter than you, better than you, and otherwise. And it's also important that, yes, we are going to have turnover, but when we lost 5 people in a week in the last year, one went to the public defender's office to make less money. One moved to South Florida to a prosecutor's office to make less money. These people are not just leaving for Perry & Young's and otherwise. They're leaving because of breakdowns in leadership. Now, with that being said, I'm also in that situation. When Mr. Bassford came in, when he won office there towards the end and waiting on that period, he was the chief prosecutor. He got to start calling shots, and then in January, he was there. He took the most seasoned prosecutor at the office, Bob Sompathy, who had a 30-0 record, no murder losses, but possibly had some ambition, and completely inexplicably, he is now not at the office. That is not leadership, even if you may not get along. What I would tell you is, Larry and I don't really know each other, but I would keep him on because he is a good prosecutor. I'm not saying he's not a bad I'm not saying he's a bad prosecutor. I'm saying that he's not a good manager. And as far as Well, what about the numbers from Ron DeSantis? Well, those are from your prosecutors. Those are not from you. I would challenge you to give me the number of cases you've tried since becoming a state attorney, and I would tell you it's probably your people, not you. A leader would acknowledge that from the start. But more than that, it's by not doing things properly and rushing things. Yes, you were recognized for Ron DeSantis, but you also had 10 people released from prison in one swath. And that is an officer that, talking about Brady letters, there was an incident that you weren't following up on, that a Brady letter never went out on the first issue with CIs. Then a Brady letter was penned when drugs were found on a desk. And that officer was the primary witness, and a case was taken to trial less than a month after that, and it got called back. That trial should have been delayed. Again, is that popular? It's not. Is it the right thing to do? It is. So having a prosecutorial experience is great, but it's also having the wherewithal to do the right thing that's more important.
Your response, Mr. Bassard?
Yes. While I've been state attorney, I personally have tried 2 double homicide cases. That is cases where we had multiple victims. In addition to that, I've also handled 3 cases that involved resentencing hearings on people that were on death row that had to be resentenced because of a change in the case law. We have sent those individuals back to death row. We are currently preparing for a case for trial, and at this point it would be not proper for me to comment on the facts of that case, but that is also another resentencing case where an individual, we hope to put him back on death row where he currently is. So I have led by example, and I intend to continue to do that as long as I am the state attorney.
Let me change the topic. I'm going to give you both a hypothetical. This county went through a pretty traumatic situation after the hurricane with the discovery of corruption in the city of Lynn Haven. The case was actually being originally investigated as a local case. And for a number of reasons, the feds got involved. I'm curious, state laws were broken. How would you have would you have prosecuted on a state level, Mr. Garman, if you'd been in this position?
It's difficult to answer that hypothetical because it would depend on if I had a conflict or not. If I had a conflict on the case, I would absolutely bring the case to where it needed to be and then certify that conflict. But the easiest answer is absolutely. If there was a case that I had the ability and I had no conflict to bring forward, I would absolutely bring it forward. Justice should be equal, regardless of your position, who you worship with, what your last name is, or otherwise. And there's really you don't need to get too deeply into that. The answer is absolutely.
Mr. Bassford.
If state laws had been broken, we would have prosecuted those unless there was a clear conflict of interest. In this case, the reason that this was prosecuted by the federal authorities is because it involved FEMA money, which is federal funds, and that's the reason that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office proceeded with the investigation and prosecution of this case.
But there were other things. There were bribery charges that happened on a local level. Didn't involve FEMA money. There was a number of local issues that were at question there, and that's a lot of people. A lot of people in this office, I'll say, who followed that case very, very closely, and we reported extensively on it. Could never understand why the federal case was the end-all, be-all, and there was no other state charges there.
Well, Tom, as you know, there were some state charges filed in that case. In fact, we had to conflict out of one of those prosecutions. That was prosecuted by a special prosecutor appointed by the governor, and then we, in fact, prosecuted one or more of those local state charges.
Okay. Just one that I've always wanted to ask. Mr. Garman, you got something you want to follow up on?
I think it's important to point out that it's not just there. We're not necessarily past our window of time. So for an elected official on corruption and other charges, some of those statute of limitations start after they leave office. So it is a thing. We've got investigators at the state attorney's office, and I believe there are some cases that should be looked into that we still have time under statutory law to look into.
Well, without naming a bunch of cases, I don't really think it's fair for me to turn around and hold Mr. Bassford to task for that I'm not sure what we're talking about. Do you want to go ahead and name some cases here, Mr. Garman?
It would be whatever law enforcement partners bring before us, but
Okay.
I'm just letting you know
Okay, I
that,
got
that
you.
our time
All right.
is not passed on some of the,
Mr. Bassford,
depending on
to my
what it
day.
is.
Are there stones out there unturned or not?
None that I'm aware of, Tom.
Okay.
Again, if law enforcement brings those cases to us, or if citizens bring those cases to us, then we would certainly look at those.
Okay. Mr. Gorman, in some of the past debates, you've made a pretty big issue of either recusing oneself for a conflict of interest or maybe recusing oneself too quickly. Is that correct? Am I down the right path there with this?
If you have a conflict, there's no such thing as too quickly. But what you want to make sure is, for instance, if it's a name, is it the same exact individual? So, I mean, you want to see the name and instantly do it. But if it's somebody that you know for sure who it is, and you know the relationship you have with them or their child or, whatever the conflict may be, we need to conflict off that as soon as possible, because even the appearance of impropriety can cause a serious conflict. So we want to do that as expeditiously as we can.
I know of a number of times you have exercised that option, Mr. Bassford. Can you think of one where you might have, or Mr. Garman is pointing towards that maybe you should have recused yourself or asked for a special prosecutor, or are there any of those circumstances out there?
Not that I'm familiar with. I mean, if we believe that there's a conflict either because of my position or a relative of the state attorney, then certainly state attorney employees, then we look at that and we make a decision whether or not we should continue to handle the case or it should be conflicted out. And we always err on the side of caution to avoid the appearance of impropriety.
Mr. Bassford, Mr. Garman's made an issue out of your son working, I guess, correct me if I'm mistaken, I think he works with Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And he's made an issue of that about your attorneys maybe not being comfortable handling cases that he's involved in. Is that an issue?
It's not an issue at our office, okay? Tom, as I indicated before, we have about 18,000 cases every year that comes into our office. That's 12,000 cases circuit-wide, misdemeanor cases, and then another 6,000 felony cases. In Bay County, I believe those numbers run somewhere about 8,000 misdemeanor cases and then 4,100 felony cases. When my son or my daughter-in-law makes a case, I don't even know about those cases most of the time, and they are reviewed by the prosecutor that is assigned to those cases, and that prosecutor reports to their supervisor. We have a misdemeanor supervisor, Bob Pale. Many times I don't even know what cases they have made and how those cases are resolved.
Mr. Garman, are you aware of any issue in that regard?
Absolutely.
Tell me
Absolutely. The fact that my opponent doesn't believe it to be an issue is the issue. Conflicts of interest are not just direct, actual, and right out in your face. There are also any potential conflicts of interest. So again, let's take the prosecutor out of it. If you're the person being prosecuted and you see Bassford and there's another Bassford, the fact that you probably don't think you're getting a fair shake. And again, I would say that if we're speaking in actual reality, especially a brand new, younger prosecutor at the misdemeanor level, I doubt highly that they truly have freedom and they really believe that they can conflict when they need to. And the fact that they then have to go to a misdemeanor prosecutor to ask if they can conflict is an issue. They know ethics. They know what they believe to be conflict and not. It's not something you should have to run up the flagpole. If you believe that you have a conflict or that there is one, you should be able to certify it. But as far as no direct examples of conflict, in the Hoot Crawford case, okay, when the Bay County Sheriff's Office had Mr. Crawford pulled over, deposition, or for those who don't know what that is, an interview under oath, the lieutenant from the sheriff's office called the state attorney's office. And in that deposition, they said that they spoke to Mr. Bassford, who said, yes, go ahead and make that arrest. Now, all of the judges in the circuit conflicted because of the long-standing nature of Mr. Crawford in the circuit. I would say that Mr. Bassford has that same relationship, but if what the court documents say are true, then there's an even larger issue that he gave the command to arrest, or at least the okay. There's no way that does not rise to the level of a conflict.
If I could respond to that, Tom.
Please.
First of all, yes, we do supervise our misdemeanor attorneys, and there again goes the lack of experience in this. When someone comes to work at the state attorney's office, they are giving a tremendous amount of discretion, but they are supervised by an attorney who has 30 years of experience, and because his job is to lead and mentor those people to make sure they're using that discretion wisely. In regard to the Hoot Crawford case, who was he really representing? Was he representing the victim, the child victim in the case, or was he really representing the person who was accused of committing the crime against the victim? In this case, law enforcement and the Department of Children and Family Services, whenever they receive a report that a child has been abused, they have an absolute duty to investigate that case. And that's what they did in this case. During their investigation, they made a determination that this child victim needed to be taken into protective custody to prevent further exposure to the person who had abused her and to prevent any harm. Now, law enforcement and the Department of Children and Family Services use extreme caution when investigating these cases, because if they don't, there could be more harm or more abuse to a victim. In this case, the attorney interfered with the investigation of this child abuse case. He was arrested. He was tried by a jury and convicted for interfering with the taken into custody, as well as tampering a witness. Now, as far as a conflict of interest, I don't see where there was a conflict of interest. He was a defense attorney. In the past, we have prosecuted attorneys who committed crimes, and we were not going to let the fact that he was an attorney merely cause a conflict of interest with our office.
Do you agree, disagree with that, Mr. Carmen?
Well, Mr. Bassford talks about deflection. That was a masterclass. In the court documents, it says that the sheriff's office called Mr. Bassford, not Mr. Bassford's office. And Mr. Bassford said, yes, arrest him. If you give the order or the authorization to arrest, there is nothing. I don't care what a jury does later. I don't care what the facts are. You yourself are conflicted. Now, if those facts end up coming before a jury or a prosecutor that doesn't have a conflict of interest, be that what it may, that's fine. But when you yourself say, yes, go ahead and arrest, you have an absolute conflict.
There you go. Could I respond to that, Tom?
Yeah, well, but I want to ask you a question. What was that conversation like? I mean, he's describing a conversation that he says he's privy to, or he understands. I guess there's court records of that.
Yes.
Was the court records accurate? Is that how the conversation
Yes.
happened?
The officers called us up and briefed us on the situation, okay? I was in a meeting with Mr. Graham, Mark Graham, my Bay County Chief Assistant, as well as Peter Overstreet, who is our major crimes leader. And I believe Mr. Hess was in the office that day preparing another case. We listened to what the officer said, and it was the consensus. And I ultimately made the decision that, yes, we were going to prosecute, we were going to authorize the arrest, because we were not going to let an attorney do something with a child that we would not allow a parent of a child to do. Again, this shows the inexperience of my opponent over there when he says anytime that I authorize an arrest that we should conflict out of cases. Many times when officers are investigating complex cases, whether they're white-collar crime cases or homicide cases, for instance, these cases where drug dealers are selling or delivering drugs that cause overdose deaths, and then we're looking at prosecuting those for manslaughter or murder, we consult and advise law enforcement when they have sufficient evidence to go forward to make an arrest. Under the scenario or hypothetical that he gives, in all of those cases, I have a conflict. That's just not the way things work in the state of Florida in this office. It's not the way they work in any prosecutor's office in the United States.
Mr. Garman, anything more on this before we put this one to bed?
Sure. The difference between the drug dealers, the white-collar criminals, and all that is they're not your declared and openly announced political opponent. Okay? This is not just a normal person. And what I would say is, again, we're trying to do integrity of trials. I am not, as my opponent tries to paint it, saying that he should have been arrested or not. I'm saying that if you make that call, that's fine to advise law enforcement. That's part of your job. But when it's a known political opponent, let someone else prosecute that case.
Tom, again, that's just fake news. That's false, okay? The only political opponents that I've had as state attorney have been has been Wes Hatcher back in 2020. He was not arrested or prosecuted. And the man sitting across from me, and to my knowledge, he's never been arrested or prosecuted. I never knew that Mr. Crawford had any ambitions of running for state attorney until after he was arrested. And I'm not going to let an attorney or anyone else create a conflict or try to create a conflict when one actually doesn't exist.
Okay. You started to mention the name Greg Wilson there.
Yes.
I would think most people would. And he did run, did he not?
He did run.
And
Greg Wilson was a political opponent of Mr. Hess when he was in office. Yes.
I'm sorry, it was before you had office. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask another question here that I'm going to give both of you the chance to answer, and I don't think I've asked this yet, but I think you've given me a lot of those answers. But tell me why your opponent should not be in this office. And we'll start with you, Mr. Garman.
Sure, it goes down to leadership. Again, it goes down to making the hard calls. It's easy to make the easy calls, right? But a good example as far as acting as a leader. Now, there's a case, the Mike Gordon case. And regardless of which side you fall on, whether you think he's innocent or guilty, really doesn't matter. What matters is when that case came in, the assigned assistant state attorney looked at the case and said, gee, I really think this looks political. I have the Bay County Sheriff's Office telling me one thing, they're upset that anything's happening, and I have the Lynn Haven Police Department telling me another. That assistant state attorney penned a memo directly to Mr. Bassford saying, this is over my pay grade. I need help. I need advice. What in the world can I do? To my knowledge, unless there's a record that hasn't been produced in the request, that letter was never answered. And in fact, 2.5 years later and multiple prosecutors later, they believed it prudent enough to keep the case and file the case. And when a motion to dismiss was filed, they didn't even answer it. So the case was dismissed because the office did not even answer the motion to dismiss, which was brought before the court. Again, pointing to it being one way or another political. But when your assistant state attorney, and by the way, this assistant state attorney had many years of experience, but it was a very large issue. A leader would take a stand. Now, you're probably, again, you've got the sheriff's office and the Lynn Haven Police Department. We know that Mr. Bassford was friends with the Lynn Haven Police Chief because he conflicted off of a case. He didn't conflict off the case that his son had at the exact same time. But at the end of the day, he'll conflict off on a case when he wants to. That should have directly been addressed. And that could have been case number 6 that he could have handled or tried because the assistant state attorney was saying, this is above my pay grade. I don't know what to do here. And they were just left with no answer.
What is this case?
That's the Mike Gordon case.
What tells the particulars? Because most people do not know what you're
Sure. So there was allegations of unlicensed contracting. Mr. Gordon was the building official and inspector. I don't know if he was still for the beach at the time, but the city of Lynn Haven.
Okay, I'm familiar with this. We did the story about it. I remember this now. Okay, sorry. Mr. Bassford, what is there
I'd like-
credence of what he's saying?
Well, am I going to get an opportunity to answer why
absolutely,
I'm more qualified than my opponent?
Yeah, absolutely.
But first, I would like to respond to some of the things that he said.
And that's fine.
All right. We did discuss this issue with the prosecutor who had the case at the time, and she had been prosecuting, I think, for a couple of years, okay, although she had been an attorney for a number of years. All right. The decision was made to go forward with the prosecution based on the facts that we had at our disposal at the time. It's not uncommon for one agency to feel one way and another agency to feel another way, but that doesn't create a conflict, and it didn't create a conflict in this case. Later, as we moved along the case and the discovery was had in this case, when we would take depositions, the case seemed to fall apart, and that's the reason it was ultimately dismissed by the court. In regard to the other issue, I'm trying to remember what that was right now. Well, I'll just answer the question. And I believe the question is, why am I a better candidate?
Why should he not be the state attorney?
Well, it's pretty simple, okay? He talks about his experience, but really when you come down to it, he has no experience as a prosecutor. Not one single case has he ever tried. How is he supposed to try and lead and mentor a team of experienced attorneys to do their job? It's been my experience that people want a leader who knows how to get the job done. My record is for everyone to see. Experienced prosecutor, a record of having an office that upholds the law, who treats everyone equitably and fairly, as well as protecting the innocent while convicting the guilty. On the other hand, well, I'm not going to disparage my opponent, but I think the voters will look at I hope they will look at the experience that the two candidates have. Who has over 30 years of experience of working to keep our families and communities safe, and a proven record of success, as opposed to someone who doesn't? I have not heard anything during our discussion tonight on how he can improve on being number one in sending dangerous criminals to prison, on how he can improve on being number one in clearance rates in the state attorney's office in the state of Florida. I haven't heard anything about that. I've only heard criticism about a couple of cases out of the 18,000. All cases are important, okay? And when we discover discrepancies in cases, we take the appropriate action. Our office and our mission, as I stated at the beginning of the interview tonight, is to uphold the public trust, to protect our community, and to enforce the law. We've done that, and we are on record of keeping our families safe.
We're going to wrap it up. Mr. Garman, I'm going to give you a minute or two to just tell us anything, tell the voters anything you'd like them to know about you, about voting for you, about this race, anything you want to know. What would you like to say?
Well, it's the honor of a lifetime to have the freedom in America to seek public office. So first and foremost, just thank you, everybody, for your outpouring of support. And again, yes, there is a stark contrast. My opponent and I agree. It's more than just being in an office for X amount of years. It's knowing that the person in that office is going to do the right thing. It's more than just, for instance, my opponent loves to say that he helped create alternative treatment courts. Currently in the 6-county area, there are 7 people in the Veterans Court. It's more than just creating something or being there. It's taking action. And we need somebody that's willing to do that, even when it's unpopular. You can go to Garmin2024.com to learn more. I'm also on Facebook. And I would love to speak with anybody that would like to know more about me, more about my experience. And I would humbly ask for your vote on or before August 20th.
All right, Mr. Garman. Mr. Bassford, you get the last word.
Thank you. As a prosecutor for over 30 years, I've spent my entire legal career, almost my entire legal career, of protecting and serving the people, the citizens of the 14th Judicial Circuit. It's been an honor to serve as a prosecutor and a double honor to serve as the state attorney. This is a tremendous job with tremendous responsibility, and it requires making decisions every day in the middle of the night, when I go to work in the mornings. And I think people need to ask themselves, heaven forbid that they or a member of their family is the victim of a serious crime. Would you want an experienced prosecutor, someone that has prosecuted cases like that, whether that be, well, the most serious case that you can think of, a homicide case? Would you want somebody in charge of the state attorney's office who's been there, done that, and been successful, leading and mentoring, if not himself personally trying that case? Or would you want somebody who has never prosecuted a simple petty theft case to be in charge of that type of prosecution? I'm the experienced prosecutor with a proven record of keeping our families and our communities safe. As long as I'm in this office, I will continue to do that and make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equitably. I would humbly appreciate your vote on or before August the 20th. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you participating in this evening. It's never easy to have verbal arguments over something like this. I'm kind of hoping that if both of you are angry at me or both of you are pleased with me, that I've done my job right. And that's all that really matters at this point, as we try to do a fair job here and present the issues that voters are going to need to know before they go make a decision. I thank you again for being here with us this evening. You've been listening to the 14th Judicial Circuit candidates debating over the 14th Judicial Circuit State Attorney's race. Eric Garman, the challenger, as well as Larry Bassford, the incumbent, and they will again have this race decided on August the 20th, the primary election. They're both running as Republicans, so everybody gets to vote in that one. We do have 3 more of these debates coming up. I'll be doing one more with County Commission candidates from District Seat 1. I believe that's next Tuesday. Don't hold me to that. And then my co-host or co-anchor, Amy Hoyt, will be doing the race for the school board, as well as the race for the sheriff's race. That's coming up on August the 1st, and then August the 8th, I believe, is going to be that school board race. So we invite you, of course, to tune in for that as well. This will live for quite a while on our website as well as our Facebook page, so if you missed any part of this, you want to go back and watch it again, you certainly can. Gentlemen, thanks again for being with us. Y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.